Hi everyone, I'm Mariana. Welcome back to day 10 of our 28-day knitting challenge. So you've been practicing stockinette stitch. Knit one row, pull one row. But something's not quite right. Maybe your edges are uneven, or your stitch look twisted, or your fabric is mysterious gaining or losing stitches. Don't worry, it happened to all of us. Today we're going to fix these common mistakes, and I'll show you why stitch markers are lifesaver in knitting. Stockinette stitch is one of the most versatile knitting patterns, but it also comes with its quirks. The right side, the front, has smooth V shapes. The wrong side, the back, has bumpy, textured pearl ridge. Now, sometimes the edge curl. This is normal and happens because the stitch tension, but once you're blocked, problem solved. And sometimes you drop a stitch or you add a stitch, especially if you're new to alternating knit and purl. But don't worry, we will go over how to fix these issues and keep your stockinette stitch looking beautiful. Now, the first mistake is when you have extra stitches on your row. When your stitch count is growing and you don't know why. Sometimes when you're distracted, you're knitting, you're not paying so much attention, you just do a yarn over and you just continue knitting. But then this makes an extra stitch and you will find a hole in your knitting. This happens often when you switch between knit and purls. Maybe you forgot and then you knit, and again this is a yarn over because I didn't move my yarn. So first thing, pay attention, especially in the beginning. And then if you're like alternating knitting and purls, always move the yarn between the needle. For a knit stitch, the yarn is on the back. For a purl stitch, the yarn is on the front. When you finish a purl stitch, if you have a knit stitch, you will move the yarn. So always double check so you don't make mistakes. Another mistake is drop stitch. You suddenly count and have a fewer stitch on your needle, and then you notice something odd. This is a drop stitch. It's an easy fix. So when you reach your drop stitch, with a crochet hook, you insert, if it's a knit stitch, you insert from the front, grab the yarn, and put it back on the needle. If it's a purl stitch, let me just turn the work. You insert the hook from the back. And you grab your yarn and put it back on the needle. Sometimes, I'll turn it again. It's not just the first stitch, but maybe it's like 2 stitches, 3 stitches. So in that case, you insert the hook and go all the way up. So the first stitch, then again, the second stitch, and you just continue until you reach your working needle. The third problem is when your stitch look twisted. You see here the V, and here suddenly is twist. This happens when you insert your needle not to the front loop, but to the back loop. It creates what is called the twisted knit stitch or the twisted purl stitch. Now, you spot it just, you see, in a column, this doesn't look right. So you just spot the wrong V. And you can easily go backward to fix it. And insert your needle on the front. It's an easy fix. And that's it. The third mistake is when you have uneven tension or wavy fabric. Some rows are looser, some rows are tighter, and this is just your knitting tension because it's not consistent. You try to relax your hands and keeping a steady rhythm when you knit, or you pull a little bit tighter. But make sure you're not pulling the yarn too tight after each stitch. Practice makes perfect, and even tension improves over time. Now let's talk about stitch markers. They keep your stitch organized and prevent mistakes. You can track stitch count, like place 1 every 10 stitch, so you can spot a missing or an extra stitch, especially when you are at the beginning. You can identify the beginning of the row when you work in the round. If you're knitting in the round, a marker helps mark the start of each round. And this is a topic we will cover later. Then they're useful for separate some pattern sections. If you're working on a pattern with repeats, markers keep section clear. You place one at the beginning and one at the end. And they can even help you maintain your tension even. Think like a checkpoint, and you go back and see the previous section, how it's worked. Have you worked loose? Your stitches are too tight? Just checkpoints. There are different kinds of stitch markers, and you can use whatever you have at home. There are closed loop markers, just single rings. You can put it in the needle, but you cannot move it until you reach the stitch marker again. And there are open stitch markers, and those are removable. You can place it, maybe you miss one stitch, you can open and move it. Those are one of my favorite. You can go with some artisanal stitch markers. Even those are great because they can open, they fit a lot of needles, so for beginners, I really use that a lot. When I'm in the car, and I don't have stitch marker on my hand or nearby me, I use my keychain, I use my rings if I have any, my hair tie, anything can be a stitch marker. So go crazy. For today's homework, I want you to knit at least 10 rows of stockinette stitch using stitch markers. If you spot a mistake we covered today, go and fix it. Drop a comment below. Do you already use stitch markers, or will you start now? tomorrow we will dive into the rib stitch, a technique that adds stretch and structure to your knitting. See you tomorrow. Happy knitting!